client question that I was proposed with was how many carbohydrates should I have in my diet per day if I am trying to maintain lean body mass while losing 5 pounds of body fat to improve athletic performance if I'm playing soccer 4 to 5 days a week, which is 8 to 10 hours per week, performance training 4 to 5 days a week, which is 6 to 12 and a half hours per week, and doing 2 to 3 anaerobic and aerobic running workouts a week, which is 2 to 3 hours a week. As a strength conditioning coach, I am limited in what kind of advice I can give to athletes in terms of nutrition, so I'm only permitted to suggest guidelines to an athlete rather than provide specific and individualized information. Having said that, carbohydrate intake needs should be based on the goals of the individual and must be built around total caloric needs, which are based on the individual's physical metrics and also their level of activity, including protein in order to maintain fat-free mass and also fat content needed to regulate hormones and other physiological processes. This athlete is highly active and they average between 2 to 4 hours of workload per day each week, meaning that she has a high level of caloric expenditure, calling for greater caloric intake, including a high level of carbohydrate intake. Because she's an elite athlete with a highly demanding schedule, we need to make sure that we're not restricting her calories by too much. And so we would recommend that she does not exceed a 500 calorie deficit on any given day, which would result in around 1 pound of fat loss each week, assuming that she maintained lean body mass. For example, if the athlete weighed 176 pounds at this level of activity, they would require roughly 3,600 kilocalories a day to maintain their current weight. So by using that 500 kilocalorie deficit per day, we would be creating a range of 3,100 and 3,600 calories each day and to facilitate fat loss while still remaining in a safe zone. To maintain fat-free mass while in a caloric deficit, the athlete will need to consume between 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of fat-free mass, which is according to Lemon et al. 2002. Lemon et al. 2002 performed a study using 22 dietary intake studies, including 50 groups of elite athletes with food data collection ranging from 3 to 7 days within each study, with energy intakes of 45 to 50 kilocalories per kilogram of body fat or body weight per day for female athletes performing less than 90 minutes of intense exercise per day. They found that if there is sufficient dietary intake of 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of lean body mass per day, that there's no need for additional protein supplementation, meaning that 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of lean body mass per day is sufficient to maintain fat-free mass with 90 minutes or less of intense physical activity per day. But because the athlete has a higher caloric expenditure and greater activity daily with an average of 2 to 4 hours rather than only 90 minutes of physical activity, we would recommend 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of fat-free mass per day to maintain lean body mass. For example, if this athlete weighed 176 pounds, that would be a window of 120 to 160 grams of protein intake per day, or 16 to 21% of total caloric intake, assuming a 3,100 kilocalorie diet and a 13 to 18% split of protein for the caloric intake, assuming a 3,600 kilocalorie diet. With these percentages being in line with the average for elite female athletes, we feel comfortable with the recommendation of that window of 120 to 160 grams of protein per kilogram of fat-free mass per day for the athlete. The next consideration to take for a female athlete, especially dealing with increased physiological and hormonal needs, is fat content, especially when working in a caloric deficit with the goal of losing fat content. The World Health Organization and dietary reference intakes organizations recommend that total fat intake be between 20 to 35% of total calories consumed daily. The minimum of 20% is to ensure adequate consumption of total calories, essential fatty acids, and fat-soluble vitamins. From a performance perspective, high-fat diets of greater than 35% total caloric intake have shown to increase running endurance and time to exhaustion in highly trained individuals, which is according to Miao et al. 1994. Highly endurance athletes can use a high-fat diet to enable muscle tissue adaptation by augmenting lipid fuel profiles, meaning fatty acid metabolism utilization during exercise. They performed a study using 6 collegiate distance runners that trained 50 plus miles per week, and the subjects performed 3 different dietary intakes using a normal diet of 2,800 calories, a 7-day fat diet of 3,500 calories, and a 7-day high carbohydrate diet of 3,500 calories. The high fat diet had 38% fat, and the carbohydrate diet had 50% carbohydrates, with each of the studies using 12% protein, and the high carb diet using 73% carbohydrates and 15% fats. What they found was that the study indicated that VO2 max and endurance time to exhaustion was highest in the high fat diet week, indicating that restrictions in fat intake can reduce the athletic performance of endurance athletes, which is applicable in this situation with the athlete playing soccer and having running workouts week to week. So it is recommended to maintain a 20 to 30% of fat content in her daily allowance, which would be roughly 69 to 103 grams of fat, assuming it's a 3,100 calorie diet, and an 80 to 120 grams of fat content, assuming a 3,600 kilocalorie diet. This will enable basic hormonal function and physiological processes to continue with her athletic performance, even assuming a caloric deficit in her diet, with the remaining calories left over from protein and fats going towards carbohydrates. With this athlete performing between 16 and 26 hours roughly a week of activity, it will be important to maintain an adequate amount of carbohydrates through that process, which is in line with her goal of improving body composition, as the athlete is considered highly active with between 2 and 4 hours of activity each day. With that, and based on the goal, the American Council on Sports Medicine recommends that carbohydrate intake should be between 6 and 10 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. Reed et al. 2014 performed a study on Division I female soccer players ranging in age from 18 to 21, measuring energy intake, exercise energy expenditure, and energy availability in 19 participants. Energy availability was defined by energy intake minus energy expenditure relative to kilograms of lean body mass. The group was assessed during the pre, mid, and post seasons of their respective schedules, and the average participant had 135 to 101 minutes per day of activity in their pre and mid seasons respectively. If the athlete met the minimum requirements of carbohydrate intake, which was 6 to 10 grams per kilogram of body mass per day, and protein, which is 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body mass per day, along with 20 to 35% of total fat intake coming from their total caloric intake, then they would have been found to have met the recommendations for ACSM. And they found that those who did meet those recommendations had significantly greater energy availability, which supports the use of 6 to 10 kilograms of carbohydrate intake per kilogram of body mass per day. So for this athlete, it should be suggested that she remain in a range of 480 to 800 grams of carbohydrates, as she weighs 176 pounds. However, that would equate to roughly 62 to 103% of her caloric intake, assuming a 3,100 calorie diet, and 53 to 89% of the caloric intake, assuming a 3,600 kilocalorie diet. Now, saying that it's not really possible because of all the other recommendations for protein to maintain fat-free mass and also for fat to maintain normal hormonal and physiological function as previously discussed. So with that, we would recommend that based on having the athlete consume 120 to 160 grams of protein and anywhere from 69 to 120 grams of fat, which equates to roughly 1,100 kilocalories to 1,700 kilocalories of daily protein and fat combined. That would mean there's only room for an additional 480 to 500 grams of carbohydrates, assuming a 3,100 kilocalorie diet, or 480 to 625 grams of carbohydrates, assuming a 3,600 kilocalorie diet, which is within the range of recommendations according to Reed et al. 2014. There were some limitations in the research in that there were very few studies that showed statistics on female athletes that were highly trained that exceeded 2 hours of training per day, which is fairly typical in an off-season program. So it would be interesting to see how those individuals exceeding that time period would react to these types of recommendations, and if they need greater recommendations in order to maintain their athletic performance and also enhance body composition on top of that. Additionally, I think that there's more research needed in terms of the safe ranges of these highly active individuals and better approaches to making sure that they're getting adequate nutrition to maintain fat-free mass, especially in female college athletes that tend to fluctuate in their caloric intake. So based on the question presented regarding adequate carbohydrate intake for a highly active individual or elite athlete that is wanting to lose 5 pounds to increase athletic performance while maintaining lean body mass at a high level of activity of 16 to 26 hours a week, it should first be considered what their protein needs are to maintain that fat-free mass, which has been concluded herein that 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of lean body mass is appropriate to maintain that fat-free mass even when attempting to lose fat content. And then additionally, the fat needs of the individual should be considered, which, based on all the other stipulations in protein and carbohydrate needs, that would be 20 to 30% of total caloric intake, so that there is still room to maintain a high level of carbohydrate intake to support energy needed to maintain athletic performance. And then finally, carbohydrate needs would be based on 6 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight, with the remainder of kilocalories after protein and fat have been considered, which would be basically the leftover kilocalories available for them to consume on any given day. These parameters would allow the athlete to maintain and or improve their athletic performance while safely reducing fat content by 5 pounds at her current workload, with a general recommendation of 480 to 625 grams of carbohydrates per day, 120 to 160 grams of protein per day, and 69 to 120 grams of fat per day. Based on her sport and needs to reduce body fat at the same time, the ratios of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates must be taken into consideration, with a priority given to protein to maintain fat-free mass, and also high recommendation of maintaining fat content to regulate hormone and physiological function, and then using carbohydrates to fill in the rest.